She came to a wedding dress salon, but the employees looked at her clothes and kicked her out the door. A few days later, these same people stood at a lavish wedding and were speechless when they saw who was walking down the aisle. Subscribe and write in the comments what city you're from. The rain had passed just an hour before, leaving the sidewalks of Manhattan slick with soft reflections and a faint, earthy scent. The city pulsed with its usual rhythm, horns in the distance, the rush of footsteps, the metallic swoosh of passing cabs. Amid it all, a woman stood beneath a modest black umbrella, adjusting the strap of a cream-colored canvas tote on her shoulder as she looked up at the storefront before her. Maison Elise. The name shimmered in delicate gold script across the frosted glass doors, framed by ivory peonies and ornate brass handles. Behind the glass, the interior glowed like a promise. Silk gowns on velvet mannequins, crystal chandeliers dripping light like dew, soft piano music weaving through the air like a spell. It was a boutique synonymous with luxury, taste, and exclusivity, a sanctum for the chosen few. Celine James hesitated for only a breath, then stepped forward. Her linen dress, pressed but simple, clung slightly to her legs in the breeze. Her curls were neatly pinned, no elaborate style, just practicality. No diamond earrings, no makeup beyond a hint of lip balm. She looked less like a bride-to-be and more like someone dropping off a portfolio at a design firm. Yet her walk was steady, her back straight, her presence unshaken. Inside, the boutique was almost empty, save for 4 employees in sleek black dresses who turned in unison at the sound of the door's delicate chime. They stood behind a marble counter, clustered together like a flock, their manicured hands hovering over coffee cups and tablets. At their center was Amanda Royce, tall and trim, her platinum hair twisted into a tight bun that pulled her face into sharp angles. Her gaze flicked over Celine from head to toe, and something like amusement settled on her lips. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone teetering between politeness and condescension. Celine offered a small smile. "Yes, I have an appointment for a fitting, 11 o'clock. Celine James." She reached into her tote and produced her phone, displaying the confirmation email with the Maison Elise letterhead and booking details. Her voice was calm, her fingers steady. Amanda barely glanced at the screen before lifting her eyes back to Celine's face. "There must be a mistake," she said, her voice a sugary blade. "Our gowns begin at $15,000. This is a private atelier. We don't accept walk-ins." "I'm not a walk-in," Celine replied evenly. "This was scheduled weeks ago. It's a custom order." From behind Amanda, a younger assistant, Courtney, suppressed a laugh, the corner of her phone peeking from her palm. "You're here for a fitting?" she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Like, actually trying on the gowns?" Celine did not respond. She simply kept her gaze on Amanda, not blinking. Amanda sighed. "I'm sorry, but I don't see your name on our client list." Selena extended the phone a little closer. "Would you mind double-checking?" Behind the counter, one of the others, Caroline, sharp-chinned and always seeking Amanda's approval, began tapping on the salon's scheduling tablet. Her eyes scanned the screen, then paused. She whispered something, and Amanda leaned closer to look. "She's listed under initials," Caroline murmured. "SJ, custom order, deposit confirmed." Amanda's lips tightened. "Must be an error." She stepped away from the counter and began walking toward the racks of gowns, her heels tapping sharply against the marble floor. "I don't believe we've ever had a client come in." She paused, eyeing Celine's linen dress. "Quite like this. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Celine didn't flinch. I believe I am. Courtney was already filming. Her phone, half concealed, captured everything: the dismissive glances, the laughter, the cold silences. She whispered into the microphone, "You guys, this woman just walked into Maison Elise acting like she belongs. Watch this." The live stream chat flooded with emojis, gifs, comments flashing faster than they could be read. Amanda returned. "Regardless of what the system says, I don't recall ever seeing your design in progress, and it's highly unusual to allow fittings for unvetted clients." Celine's voice never wavered. "I approved the sketches directly with Elise Moreau. She handled the consultation personally." This time the laughter was audible. Caroline covered her mouth with manicured fingers. "Elise hasn't taken private consultations in over a year," Amanda said. "She's in Paris." Celine nodded slowly, her hazel eyes still steady. "Then perhaps you could contact her." Courtney turned her phone directly toward Celine now, no longer hiding the stream. "Do you mind telling our viewers how you got in here?" she said sweetly. "You're not an intern, or—" That was when it happened. A glass of rosé, set precariously on a tray behind the counter, accidentally tipped as Amanda turned. The pink liquid cascaded through the air and splashed across Celine's front, darkening the beige fabric, soaking into the linen like a spreading wound. "Oh!" Amanda gasped with exaggerated horror. "I'm so sorry. Let me get you a towel." There was no towel. No one moved. Celine looked down at her dress. Her expression didn't change. She took a deep breath, glanced at the rose-colored stain, then looked back at Amanda. "I'd like to speak to the manager," she said softly. Amanda smiled brightly. "Darling, I am the manager." Behind her, the staff laughed again. Courtney's phone screen caught every second. Celine nodded once, adjusted the strap on her tote, and walked toward the door without another word. As she reached the exit, Amanda called after her, "Try Macy's next time." The boutique door whispered shut behind her. The video hit 2 million views within the first 12 hours. Twitter took the lead with the hashtag #LinenBride, followed by #BeigeAmbition. Instagram Reels showed Celine's quiet dignity next to zoomed-in mockeries of the stain on her dress. On TikTok, the audio was repurposed a dozen different ways. Amanda's final jab turned into a remix track. Courtney's followers doubled overnight. Several fashion influencers reposted the clip, weighing in with sneers masked as humor. None of them knew her name. None of them had any idea who Celine James truly was. And she said nothing. Not a tweet, not a statement, not a single post. While the internet laughed, mocked, and shared, Celine worked quietly behind the scenes. Appointments were shifted, plans accelerated. Conversations that had been private moved into execution. Lawyers, contracts, mergers. She wasn't hiding. She was preparing. Because in 7 days, every single one of them would be in the same room again. Only this time, she wouldn't be the woman in the doorway. She would be the one at the altar. And the dress they refused to let her touch? She would wear it as their new boss. The video of Celine James being soaked in rosé at Maison Elise exploded across social media with a force that no one, not even its creators, fully anticipated. What had begun as a short, shaky live stream captured by a junior stylist with a taste for attention spiraled into a viral moment within hours. It was reposted, stitched, memed, parodied, and critiqued. By evening, #LinenBride trended globally. The image of a composed, dark-skinned woman in a soaked beige dress standing silent among grinning white salon staff became fodder for every flavor of commentary: mocking, sympathetic, outraged, or obliviously cruel. The original poster, Courtney, basked in the glow of a sudden internet fame. Her Instagram following tripled in 2 days. Brands reached out offering partnerships. In interviews, she downplayed the incident as a funny misunderstanding and leaned into the story that Celine had probably snuck in. The language used in these digital arenas was coded but clear. They called her delusional, said she had main character syndrome, that she was trying to live a fantasy life. The word pretendin' appeared often, always underlined with something unspoken but understood. In group chats between the boutique staff and their influencer friends, the tone was celebratory. They sent each other laughing emojis, discussed the increase in views, and congratulated Amanda for her graceful way of handling the situation. No one admitted to knowing exactly who Celine was, but it didn't matter. To them, she was just a blip, a footnote in their growing social currency. Celine, for her part, remained publicly silent. No statements, no interviews, no retaliation. She did not respond to DMs, even the ones that trickled in from anonymous accounts trying to provoke her. This silence became part of the fascination. "Why isn't she saying anything?" commentators asked. "If it were me, I'd be suing them." The quiet, unnerved people. The world had grown used to instant reactions, to digital battles fought with words and screens. But Celine was a different kind of storm. In her Brooklyn studio apartment, with its sunlit windows and polished concrete floors, she moved through each day deliberately. She spoke on the phone in low tones, met with lawyers in sleek conference rooms, signed documents without ceremony. She pulled designs from drawers, fabric samples from racks. In the privacy of her world, Celine was not the woman the world had mocked. She was building something, and every share, every cruel comment, every viral post was fuel. The only people who saw her in these days were a small, trusted circle. Her assistant Mariah, a sharp-eyed woman with a photographic memory. Her attorney, a quiet powerhouse named Esther with a permanent calm. And of course, Carter. He came and went with little fanfare, his presence more grounded than protective. He didn't ask her to explain what she planned, and she didn't volunteer. He knew her silences were more articulate than most speeches. One afternoon, as she sat at her desk sketching a neckline variation for a gown, Carter leaned against the frame of the window, watching her. Outside, the city buzzed, oblivious. "You sure you want to go through with this?" he asked. She looked up, her pencil pausing mid-stroke. "I'm not doing this to prove a point," she said. "I'm doing this to build a new standard." He nodded once. That was enough. Meanwhile, preparations for what the press was calling the wedding of the decade accelerated in secret. The venue was a private estate in upstate New York, a converted chateau surrounded by vineyards and lavender fields. The guest list was ruthlessly curated: royalty, media tycoons, fashion moguls, politicians, and tech giants. Security was tighter than at any previous event Carter's company had hosted. The identity of the bride remained a closely guarded mystery. Only those directly involved in planning knew the truth. The majority believed the bride to be a foreign royal, or perhaps an heiress from the West Coast. Several bloggers speculated that it was a model hiding from the paparazzi. One suggested the wedding was a corporate stunt to launch a new luxury brand. The speculation only amplified the event's allure. Among the invitees were the staff of Maison Elise and a select group of fashion influencers, those whose reach had driven the viral spread of Celine's Humiliation. They received invitations sealed in white wax delivered by hand. The envelopes bore no names, only the initials of the event's monogram and the words "Private Ceremony." Amanda Royce was among them. She opened hers in the break room of the boutique, her fingers trembling slightly. She assumed, with absolute confidence, that her performance at the salon had earned her recognition. She told the staff that this was proof they were doing something right. Caroline nodded in agreement. Courtney, now adorned in borrowed designer looks from new brand sponsors, posted a boomerang of her invitation with the caption, "Looks like I'll be seeing the bride after all." None of them questioned why, exactly, they had been invited. The week passed quickly. The internet shifted its attention to new trends, new scandals. But for Celine, every day brought her closer to a reckoning. Not one of anger or vengeance, but of order. She had no interest in watching people squirm. She wanted them to look inward and see who they had become. If that required discomfort, so be it. The morning of the wedding dawned cool and clear. Mist clung to the hills, retreating slowly as the sun climbed higher. At Chateau Valmont, staff moved in quiet synchrony. Long tables were set under sweeping canopies. Orchids floated in crystal bowls. A string quartet rehearsed near the rose garden. Security stood at attention in discreet dark suits, their eyes always moving. Guests arrived by private jet, luxury car, and in some cases, helicopter. The air buzzed with elegance and competition. Designers nodded curtly to one another, editors exchanged air kisses, influencers jockeyed for lighting angles for the perfect backdrop of vines or marble columns. Amanda, Caroline, Courtney, and the others arrived together in a chartered SUV. Each wore a gown borrowed through a PR agency partnership. Amanda chose a sleek navy number with a plunging back. Courtney wore glittering gold, documenting every moment on her live stream. As they entered the grand courtyard, they murmured about who the bride might be. "Whoever she is," Courtney said, "she better be iconic." They laughed. They sipped champagne. They didn't see Celine arrive. She came alone, dressed in muted linen once again. No entourage, no jewels. Her skin glowed in the morning light, and her eyes scanned the crowd calmly, without expectation or fear. Her presence sent a ripple through the air, though few immediately noticed. Those who did stared, squinted, nudged their neighbors. Courtney gasped aloud, nearly spilling her drink. "Is that her?" Amanda hissed. "It can't be. She wouldn't dare." But she had. Celine stood at the edge of the gathering, her hands lightly clasped, her face serene. Slowly, eyes turned. Whispers began, then laughter. Quiet at first, then louder. Not all at once, but like the spread of cold through warm water. Phones emerged, screens lit up. The game began again. "She's crashing a billionaire's wedding now?" Courtney asked her live stream. Amanda's voice dripped venom. "This is just sad." Caroline muttered something about security. A young influencer named Zara, clad in lavender chiffon, twirled toward Celine and said to no one in particular, "I guess thrift shops are stepping up their wedding wear." The joke landed. More laughter. A pink macaron struck the hem of Celine's dress. The cameras caught everything. Still, she did not flinch, not when the wine was tossed at her feet, not when a voice from the crowd shouted, "Back to Brooklyn, darling," not when Courtney, emboldened by her previous fame, started another livestream titled, "Beige Girl Crashes Part 2. Celine turned towards the source of the laughter, her gaze steady. She opened her mouth, not to argue, not to shout, but to speak the simplest truth. "I'm invited." The words were soft but audible. The quartet faltered mid-note. Amanda barked a dry laugh. "Of course you are." Courtney stepped closer, phone raised. "Mind telling us who exactly invited you?" Celine turned her face toward the nearest security guard. "Ask Carter H." The name was spoken like punctuation. Full stop. A pause fell across the courtyard. Realization rippled faster than disbelief could catch up. Then everything shifted. The music ceased entirely. The air thickened. The bride, it seemed, had already arrived. Silence clung to the courtyard like fog after the storm. The music had stopped. Conversations dissolved mid-sentence. 1,000 eyes turned toward the woman standing near the marble fountain, her hands loosely folded in front of her, her beige linen dress still faintly stained with the pink splash of rose. The scent of orchids and fresh-cut grass hung in the air, but no one breathed. For a moment, time forgot to move. Then someone near the catering tent scoffed, and the tension snapped like a brittle thread. The crowd surged forward, not physically, but with the force of collective disbelief. Phones rose like a forest of limbs. Laughter returned, quieter now, tinged with uncertainty. "She's bluffing," someone said, voice shrill. "She's doing this for attention." Amanda Royce was the first to step toward the woman they still refused to believe could belong. Her navy gown shimmered under the sun, her heels clicking across the flagstones with theatrical poise. She didn't look at Celine so much as she looked around her, ensuring her audience was watching. "You can't possibly think this is going to work twice," she said loudly, her voice high with condescension. "This isn't a salon, and you don't get to hide behind your phone here." Celine's eyes met hers, calm, steady, unreadable. "I was invited," she repeated. Amanda smiled coldly. "Then where's your +1, darling?" Before anyone could answer, a tall figure emerged from the ivy-wrapped archway at the far end of the courtyard. Dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, Carter H. Haywood cut through the garden like a blade. Sunlight glinted off the silver in his cufflinks, but his face remained unreadable, his pace unhurried. He did not look at the guests as he passed. His eyes were locked on one person. Celine didn't move as he approached. She didn't have to. When he reached her, he took her hand without ceremony, threading his fingers through hers like it was the most natural act in the world. The silence returned, deeper this time. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, not as a performance, but as if they were alone in the room. Gasps scattered across the courtyard like raindrops on marble. "She's with him?" a designer whispered. "That can't be. She's the bride." No, this is a trick." Carter turned then, standing beside Celine, and finally addressed the crowd. His voice was low but carried effortlessly. He did not raise it. He didn't need to. "I'd like to introduce you," he said, "to my fiancée." The words dropped like stones into a still pond. There was no applause, no cheers, only stunned silence and a ripple of shifting weight as people exchanged glances, trying to process what they had just heard. "Her name is Celine James," Carter continued. "She's the love of my life, the woman I will marry today." Somewhere near the back, Courtney lowered her phone in slow motion. Her stream was still running, her viewers rapidly increasing, comments pouring in like an avalanche. Amanda's mouth opened, but no words came. Caroline reached for her flute and missed, nearly knocking over the table beside her. Zara blinked rapidly, her mouth slightly agape. Carter's expression didn't change. We chose to keep her identity private until now. Not because we were ashamed, but because we knew the world would try to make it about anything but love. He glanced at Celine, and she nodded once, a subtle gesture filled with trust. "And since the world insisted on speculating," he continued, Let me clarify a few things." He turned slightly, addressing the crowd more fully. "Celine is not a social climber. She's not a model. She's not a fame seeker. She is the founder and creative director of Eve, yes, the fashion label you've all been wearing, photographing, and praising for the last 2 years. You know the clothes. Now you know the woman." A sound escaped from someone's throat, a strangled noise between a laugh and a sob. Another glass fell and shattered on the stones. "She built that company from a Brooklyn studio apartment with nothing but sketches and grit," Carter said. "No investors, no sponsors, just her eye and her brilliance. And last quarter, Eve was valued at over $10 billion. Zara's lavender chiffon seemed to wilt under the weight of the news. Theo, standing beside her, looked like he might be sick. And as of yesterday," Carter added, "Celine is also the majority shareholder of Maison Elise." This time, the silence cracked audibly. Amanda staggered back half a step. "She acquired controlling interest in your boutique," Carter went on. "Quietly, thoroughly, and permanently." The crowd broke, splintering into whispers, gasps, the rustle of disbelief. The influencers glanced at each other, suddenly unsure of their own worth. Someone whispered, "No wonder they didn't recognize her. She owns them." Celine had not yet spoken. She stood beside Carter, dignified, unmoving, her gaze sweeping across the crowd not in anger, but in quiet judgment. Carter turned again. "There are some here who humiliated her, publicly and privately, who live-streamed her pain, mocked her for the color of her skin, the simplicity of her dress, and the dignity of her silence. You judged her by her outfit, not by her soul. And now you have to live with that." He nodded towards the tall woman near the edge of the courtyard. Elena Ruiz, Celine's chief of staff, stepped forward in a gray suit with a tablet in her hands. Her heels were silent, but her presence was not. "Elena," Carter said, "name them." Elena read without flinching. "Amanda Royce, Caroline Dunst, Courtney Blake, for orchestrating and broadcasting Miss James's mistreatment at Maison Elise. Zara Kane, Theo Voss, for amplifying it, for profiting from her pain. You're formally dismissed from all brand collaborations and barred from any future partnership with Eve or its subsidiaries." Security emerged, discreet but firm. Amanda shrieked. Caroline turned pale. Courtney began to cry, whispering, "I didn't know," over and over again, as one of the guards gently took her elbow. Phones filmed as they were led away. Amanda's navy gown caught on a low table and tore at the hem. Zara's lavender sash unraveled. Theo's face drained of color. It wasn't dramatic. It was surgical, quiet, controlled, the exact opposite of the chaos they had created. Outside the gates, reporters swarmed, flashbulbs popped, headlines were already being written. Maison Elise manager ousted by secret bride. Viral mockery turns into corporate justice. Black woman at center of internet controversy marries billionaire in stunning turn. Back inside, Carter turned back to Celine, the worst behind them. "They know now," he said softly. She nodded. "Good." For the first time that day, her expression shifted, not into a smile, but something deeper, a sense of peace, vindication. Not for the public spectacle, not even for herself, for the principle, for every woman who had walked into a room and been told she didn't belong. Celine looked out across the garden where the guests still stood in stunned silence. "Now," she said, her voice like velvet, "let's get married." The quartet picked up their instruments again. The ceremony would begin. The air inside the chateau's great hall was thick with tension, perfumed with cut orchids and wax from hundreds of candles flickering in tall crystal holders. Above the guest, the vaulted ceilings, painted with cherubs and constellations, seemed to press downward, as though the very architecture leaned in to listen. Every seat was filled, but no one was speaking. Conversations had ground to a halt. The musicians sat idle, bows resting against silent strings. All eyes were fixed on the empty space at the front of the aisle, where the altar stood bathed in amber light, waiting. Guests shifted in their seats, checking the time discreetly, wondering if this was part of some orchestrated spectacle. The bride was late. There was no announcement, no whisper from the staff, no apologetic coordinator stepping forward with a clipboard, just silence and growing curiosity. In the back of the hall, near the tall oak doors, a soft stir ran through the crowd. A movement. Heads turned. The massive doors remained closed, but a figure approached them from the inside. The groom. Carter Haywood stepped into view like a tide rolling in, slow and certain. He wore a black tailored suit so sharp it seemed stitched with shadow, the lapels pressed like steel. There was no flower on his lapel, no boutonniere, just a single cufflink glinting in the candlelight, bearing the stylized E of his fiancée's fashion label. His expression was unreadable, but not cold. It held a stillness that came not from detachment, but from knowing something no one else did. He took his place at the altar with a quiet grace that silenced even the low whispers. His eyes scanned the room slowly, passing over designers, politicians, journalists, and influencers, each of them adorned in borrowed glamour and unearned certainty. He looked at them not with judgment, but with memory. He had seen the streams. He had read the comments. He had watched the way the world turned mockery into entertainment, cruelty into currency. And now he stood before them, holding the weight of a promise. A murmur rose at the back of the room, the doors opened, and everything else ceased to matter. Celine James stepped into the hall, not as the woman they had humiliated, not as the viral subject of laughter, but as a vision of power wrapped in silk and diamonds. Her gown cascaded in waves of ivory, the fabric clinging like light made solid. Embroidered with delicate threads of platinum and stitched with diamonds along the bodice, it shimmered with each step. Her train followed like a river of moonlight, gliding behind her with soundless command. Her hair was swept up in a simple twist, elegant and strong, held by a single diamond clip that caught the candlelight like a star. No veil covered her face. She had nothing to hide. Her skin, radiant under the golden glow, bore no trace of shame. Her eyes, hazel, direct, unflinching, met every stare and returned it with silence. She walked alone, without a father or an escort, without a handler or stylist fussing at her side. Her steps were measured, calm, grounded. She walked not like someone who had something to prove, but like someone who had already proven it and simply chose not to explain. A gasp rippled across the room. Amanda Royce, now seated toward the middle, turned pale. Caroline's hands trembled as she clutched the armrest of her chair. Courtney, in the far corner, raised her phone again, but hesitated before hitting record. Zara's mouth fell open, and Theo gripped the back of the pew in front of him as though bracing against a wave. The guests who had mocked her, the same ones who had tossed macarons and insulted her flats, now stared in stunned silence. The woman they had thought beneath them now stood above them all, not because of who she married, but because of who she had always been. At the altar, Carter's eyes did not leave hers. As she reached him, he extended his hand. She placed hers in it without hesitation. Their fingers intertwined like roots rejoining beneath the surface. A quiet settled over the room, not silence born of shock, but reverence. The weight of recognition had finally arrived. The officiant, a silver-haired Frenchman in crisp white vestments, stepped forward. His accent curled around his words like ivy as he began the ceremony. But no one truly listened to the scripted lines. All attention was on the two figures standing together, their connection so palpable it bent the air around them. When it came time for vows, Carter turned first. "I've built empires," he said, his voice steady, "but nothing as meaningful as this." He looked at her, not through her. "You have held your silence while others shouted. You have shown grace when others clawed. You have never needed me to protect you, but I will. Always." His voice dropped slightly. "Today, I vow not to make you stronger. I vow to stand beside your strength." There was no applause, only a collective breath drawn and held. Then Celine spoke. Her voice was velvet and iron, low and unwavering. "I have known power that shouts and power that whispers. I've seen both fall." She paused, eyes moving slowly across the sea of faces. "But love," she continued, "love doesn't seek applause. It doesn't need permission. It just is. Like truth, like water, like fire. I vow to walk with you in both light and shadow, without pretense, without shame." A few guests blinked back tears. Others stared, unwilling to meet her gaze. The officiant gave them the nod. "You may kiss." They did, not performatively, not for the cameras. A kiss like a seal, a pact between equals. Music resumed, soft, orchestral, reverent. The guests stood, some applauding, others too stunned to move. The aisle cleared for their exit, and Celine walked out with Carter at her side, the train of her gown floating like justice behind her. Outside, the reception awaited. Lanterns swayed from archways, casting golden pools of light. Long tables were set with silverware and glass. Beneath the stars, the party began in hesitant waves. People whispered. Some tried to resume the old rhythm of influence and networking, but the tone had shifted. The queen had arrived, and she had changed the room. Toward the edge of the garden, Elena Ruiz reviewed the final legal documents one last time on her tablet. With the merger complete and the staff formally dismissed, Maison Elise would be folded into the new vision Celine had been planning all along. "Done," Elena said softly, handing the tablet to an aide. "Effective immediately." In the center of the garden, Carter and Celine shared their first dance. A hush fell over the guests again as they moved in slow circles, the train of her dress glowing in the light, his hand steady at the small of her back. It was a moment suspended, no longer about fashion or status or spectacle. It was about presence, about dignity, about quiet, unshakable triumph. And as the music swelled, the guests watched with a kind of reverence not born of celebrity, but of awe. Because they all knew, whether they admitted it or not, that they had just witnessed the rewriting of the rules. And she had done it without ever raising her voice. As twilight deepened over Chateau Valmont, the celebration unfolded like a dream painted in gold and lavender. The garden glowed beneath floating lanterns strung between the cypress trees, and the guests moved carefully now, their steps lighter, their laughter thinner, as if uncertain whether joy was permitted after what had just passed. The dance floor filled slowly, with those bold or oblivious enough to pretend nothing had changed. Others lingered at the fringes, whispering, processing, glancing toward the newlyweds who had reshaped the air itself. At the far end of the lawn, a photographer snapped quiet photos of Carter and Celine, who stood just beneath the arch of an ancient olive tree, her fingers resting lightly in his, the folds of her gown spilling over the grass like a living sculpture. Neither of them posed. They didn't need to. They simply existed, radiant and rooted, as if the world had finally adjusted to the gravity of their truth. But not everyone embraced the change. Amanda Royce, her navy gown still torn from her earlier stumble, sat on a stone bench near the eastern fountain, clutching a half-empty glass of champagne in hands that trembled despite her effort to appear composed. Her lipstick had faded. Her hair had begun to lose its lacquered shape. She looked less like the poised gatekeeper of a luxury salon and more like a relic from a closing act. Around her, silence had settled. No one approached. The very people who had once orbited her presence now avoided her gaze. Caroline lingered nearby, pacing in tight circles, phone in hand, scrolling with increasing desperation. Her face was pale, and she seemed not to see the rose petals beneath her feet or hear the music floating across the lawn. She was searching for a signal in the wreckage, some message from corporate, some email that would explain this away, undo what had been done. Courtney stood frozen beside the drink table, her gold dress catching the flicker of candlelight. Her phone had been confiscated hours ago by one of Elena Ruiz's aides, and her hand twitched occasionally as if still reaching for it. She hadn't spoken since being escorted off the livestream stage, and now she stared blankly at the table, eyes glistening with the panic of a performer who no longer had an audience. Further down the path, Zara paced angrily in her lavender chiffon, muttering curses beneath her breath. She passed Theo, who sat on the edge of a garden bench, hunched over, running a hand through his hair. He looked up at her once, opened his mouth, then thought better of it. Whatever camaraderie had bonded them in mockery now fractured under the weight of consequence. The security team, professional and discreet, had not returned them to the chateau's interior. Instead, they were escorted to the edges of the property, where they were instructed to wait for their transportation. No dramatic exits, no sirens, just the cold reality of being dismissed. They remained on the outskirts, exiled from the glow and warmth of the event, their names echoing silently in digital purgatory as followers unfollowed, sponsors withdrew, and comment sections turned venomous. The shift in public perception had not waited for morning. On social media, Celine's identity spread like wildfire. Screens lit up across the globe with headlines that read more like retractions than reports. Fashion blogs scrambled to update their bios of Eve, no longer referring to the founder as mysterious, but instead declaring Celine James a visionary. Outlets that had mocked her for her fashion faux pas now praised her poise, her resilience, her elegance. Hashtags changed tone. Hash beige ambition gave way to hash ever revealed, and the phrase, "she walked through fire and didn't burn," began to circulate beneath montages of her entrance, her vows, her silent grace in the face of scorn. Investors responded accordingly. Maison Elise's stock, already wobbling from industry rumors, began to spiral. After the revelation that Celine now owned the majority share, board members held emergency calls behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Eve's valuation soared overnight. Market analysts called it the Celine effect, crediting her for initiating what one fashion editor called the biggest paradigm shift in the industry since ready-to-wear. Inside the wedding reception, none of this distracted the bride. She moved through the garden with quiet purpose, accepting congratulations, returning embraces, speaking in low tones to those who approached with genuine warmth. Her smile remained composed, never forced. It was the smile of a woman who had survived something invisible, something deeper than public shame, the slow erosion of dignity over years of microaggressions, dismissals, and cold glances in rooms full of silk and white walls. Carter stayed near her, not as a shield, but as a pillar, his gaze soft when it fell on her, harder when it passed over those who had once insulted her. He spoke little, letting Celine steer the evening. This was her moment. Not for vengeance, but for restoration. At the far side of the garden, a small group of fashion editors huddled around Elena Ruiz, who stood with the ease of a woman used to navigating powerful rooms. She answered questions carefully, each word measured. When asked about the future of Maison Elise, she was clear. The brand would be restructured under Yves' leadership. A full rebranding would follow. The culture would change. "And the former staff?" a reporter asked, tilting her head. Elena's reply was quiet but firm. "They are no longer with the company. As of today, we begin again." Back near the entrance, a pair of black cars arrived quietly on the gravel road, headlights soft, engines idling. The dismissed guests were summoned in silence. One by one, they left. Amanda tried to hold her head high, but her knees shook as she stood. Her heel broke on the uneven stone path. No one offered to help. Caroline walked behind her, clutching her phone like a broken compass. Courtney followed, mascara streaking her cheeks, arms folded tightly. Zara slammed the car door behind her with a snarl. Theo left last, pausing once to look back at the glowing chateau, eyes wide with the realization that he would never be allowed through those doors again. By midnight, the garden had changed again. The music had softened. The lanterns swayed slower in the breeze. Guests lingered now in intimate clusters, the pressure of pretense finally broken. People laughed more honestly, drank more deeply, and looked each other in the eyes. Celine stood by the reflecting pool, watching the stars ripple on the water's surface. Carter joined her, offering her a glass of water instead of wine. She took it, sipped, and leaned lightly against him. "They've all gone," he said. She nodded. They were never meant to stay. He glanced at her, his expression filled with something softer than pride, deeper than admiration. "You didn't just change the room," he said. "You changed the rules." She turned toward him fully. "The rules were never fair. I just reminded them that I didn't need their permission to exist." Behind them, the chateau pulsed with light, laughter echoing across the gardens. Somewhere near the terrace, a jazz trio began a quiet song. Celine smiled faintly and reached for Carter's hand. Together, they walked back into the celebration, not as a spectacle, not as a statement, but as equals stepping forward into the world they had reshaped. And, for the first time that night, the guests didn't just look. They saw. The celebration lasted long into the night, though the mood had changed in the way summer air shifts before a storm, charged with something invisible, pulsing with a sense of newness. The laughter was less forced now, the movements of the guests less rehearsed. Conversations turned from fashion trends and social capital to reflection, to quiet awe. Under the canopy of stars, amidst candlelit tables and the fragrance of night-blooming jasmine, a rare silence lived beneath the music. No one could quite name it, but everyone could feel it. At the center of it all, Celine stood like the eye of that quiet storm, calm, graceful, unshaken. Her gown, once the target of denial and dismissal, now shimmered in the lamplight like a second skin of triumph. No veil covered her head. She wore only that single diamond hairpin, catching the light like a reminder. Nothing about her needed hiding. A cluster of young women, many of them stylists, interns, and junior editors, watched her from the edge of the terrace. Some whispered among themselves, others simply stared. They had heard the rumors for years, speculated about the mysterious founder of Eve, admired the clean lines and audacious minimalism of the designs that had redefined what elegance could be. But none of them had imagined she would look like this, that the woman behind the billion-dollar label would be black, that she would walk with the restraint of someone who had endured far more than gossip. Near the reflecting pool, an editor from a major fashion publication approached her cautiously. She had once shared the viral video of the rose incident with a sarcastic caption. Now, her voice trembled with sincerity. "Your dress," she said. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Celine inclined her head in quiet acknowledgement. "Thank you." "I didn't know," the woman started, then stopped. "I didn't know it was you." "You didn't care to know," Celine said gently. "That's what has to change." The editor opened her mouth again, but the words didn't come. She looked down, nodded once, and stepped back into the crowd. Later, when most of the guests had moved indoors for the candlelit dinner, Celine remained in the garden. A warm wind rustled the tall hedges. The fountain sang quietly. Beside her, Carter stood, his hand brushing hers in small, grounding movements. He didn't speak until she did. "I want to speak before dessert," she said. He didn't ask what she meant. He simply nodded. At the stroke of 10, the lights dimmed in the great hall. The low hum of conversation stilled. The strings faded to silence, and Celine stepped forward, alone, toward the center of the room. Her steps echoed off the marble. A hush fell like snow. No microphone was needed. When she began to speak, her voice was low but steady, and somehow it filled every corner of the room. "This evening has been many things," she said. "A wedding, a celebration, a reunion, and for some, a reckoning." She let the words settle, not with bitterness, but with clarity. "I never meant for my story to become public in this way. I did not ask to be filmed. I did not ask to be mocked. But I did ask for a dress. And in the process, I received something far more important. A reflection of how this industry sees women like me. Not just women of color, but women without obvious wealth, without polish, without a famous last name. Women who don't enter rooms dressed for acceptance because they were never taught to seek it. A few people in the room shifted in their seats, but no one looked away. I was told I didn't belong because of my clothes, because of my voice, because I didn't arrive in the right armor. But what is fashion if not a mirror? And what does it say about us when the mirror only reflects the same face over and over again? She paused, letting silence do its work. I built Eve to answer that question, not with anger, but with intention. I wanted to design for the women no one designed for, the ones who weren't invited to the table, or worse, who didn't even know a table existed. She looked across the room, and for a moment, her eyes met those of a young woman sitting near the back. Dark skin, simple dress, hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked like she had not breathed in 10 minutes. I do not want applause, Celine said. I want change. The room held still. I'm announcing the expansion of Eve. We are creating a bridal line, not for the elite, not for the curated few, but for every woman who dares to love herself enough to want beauty on her terms. Inclusive sizing, adaptive design, custom work that doesn't require a pedigree. A network of designers from across the globe, black, brown, indigenous, trans, disabled, who have never been given a platform. We will give them one, not as charity, but as collaboration. Murmurs swept through the room. Eyes widened, hands reached for phones, then hesitated. No one wanted to break the spell. And as for Maison Elise, she continued, its name will remain, for now. But its purpose has changed. Its leadership has changed. The gates it once guarded have been opened. The rules rewritten. There will be no more auditions for belonging. No more tests in the fitting room. No more humiliation passed off as heritage. Someone began to clap. Another joined. Soon, the room was filled with the sound, not raucous or showy, but honest. From editors, models, interns, guests who had arrived skeptical and now sat transformed. Some stood, some remained seated, stunned into stillness. Celine held up her hand once, and the applause softened. "I want to say one more thing," she said. "To those who judged me, learn from this. Kindness costs nothing, but cruelty has a price." And then she stepped back, returning to Carter's side. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Later that evening, beneath the stars, Celine found herself standing alone near the stone fountain. The crowd had returned to dancing, eating, talking in hushed, reverent tones. She stared into the water, watching the reflection of her dress ripple under the surface. A voice broke the stillness. "I'm sorry." She turned. Margot, one of the younger boutique assistants, stood several feet away. Her black lace dress creased from sitting too long, her face pale. "I didn't say anything when they laughed," she continued, voice cracking. "I knew it was wrong. I didn't know who you were." Celine approached slowly, her expression unreadable. When she reached Margot, she placed a gentle hand on her arm. "You don't need to know someone's name to be kind," she said softly, "but your apology matters." Margot nodded, visibly trembling. "I need someone to help oversee the new bridal showroom," Celine added. "Someone who understands what it means to see things clearly after looking away for too long." Margot stared. "Me?" Celine smiled. "You saw me when no one else did. That counts." The offer was left hanging, like a promise in the air. Back in the garden, the music shifted again. A slow instrumental, rich with strings, rose into the sky. Carter appeared at her side, offering his hand. She took it, and they returned to the center of the space where the grass had been worn into a soft dance floor. They swayed under the stars, beneath lanterns and silence, and the knowing eyes of a world beginning to change. Her gown shimmered as they moved, the fabric trailing like light. Guests watched from the edges, wine glasses in hand, eyes full of something unspoken. No one reached for their phones. No one wanted to look away. And as they danced, Celine knew the real mission had only just begun. The first light of dawn crept slowly over the hills surrounding Chateau Valmont, gilding the tiled rooftops and spilling through the high, arched windows like a quiet benediction. The festivities had faded into the silence of sleep or contemplation, leaving behind only traces: half-drunk glasses, wilted petals on tabletops, candles still smoldering in the morning hush. Somewhere, far off, a bird began to sing, tentative and clear as if testing the world's readiness to begin again. Inside the chateau, much of the staff moved in hushed rhythms, cleaning, resetting, restoring. The grandeur remained, but the air had shifted. The atmosphere, once saturated with pride and pretense, now hummed with something else entirely: a quiet humility, an awareness that something essential had been redefined. On the terrace overlooking the vineyard, Celine stood barefoot, wrapped in a silk robe the color of bone. Her hair had been let down, curls tousled by sleep and wind. In her hands she held a warm mug of tea, steam curling up toward her face as she watched the sky shift from charcoal to blue. She hadn't slept much, but she didn't feel tired. Her body felt light, almost unmoored, as if the weight she had carried for so long had finally unhooked itself from her bones. Behind her, the door opened with a soft creak. Carter stepped out, still dressed in his shirt from the night before, the collar unbuttoned. He came to her side without a word, slipping an arm around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. They stood that way for a long while, the vineyard stretching before them, the horizon endless and pale. "They're calling you a revolutionary," he murmured. Celine didn't smile, but her lips parted as if tasting the word. "Good," she said quietly. "Let's keep it that way." They remained there, side by side, the breeze catching the hem of her robe, the morning touching their skin like a blessing. Later that morning, the first headlines began to pour in. Major publications declared it the wedding that changed fashion. Others focused on the woman at the heart of it all. Celine James redefines elegance, read one. From viral humiliation to bridal icon, proclaimed another. Her speech from the night before was already being transcribed, reposted, dissected, translated. Clips of her walking alone down the aisle, her words about kindness and cruelty, the unflinching dignity with which she had stood at the altar, all of it spread like wildfire. But Celine remained still. She didn't chase the wave. She let it rise without her. Inside the chateau's reception hall, a few remaining guests gathered for breakfast. Among them were those who had once stayed silent, who had watched the mockery unfold and said nothing. Now they looked at Celine with something deeper than admiration, with respect. Not because she had won, but because she had made them confront their own reflections. Margot sat alone near the window, a plate of fruit untouched before her. Her eyes were rimmed red, but her posture had changed. The defeat was gone. What remained was resolve. When Celine entered, dressed simply in a cream dress and low sandals, Margot stood. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice rough but sure, "about what kind of place I want to help build." Celine met her gaze. "Then we'll build it together." It was a moment without ceremony, but more real than most contracts. Later, in the car that would take them back to New York, Celine sat quietly, watching the road unwind beneath the trees. Carter sat beside her, holding her hand. They didn't speak much. There was nothing that needed saying. The silence between them was full. Back in the city, things had already begun to move. The newly installed management team at Maison Elise began implementing sweeping changes. Training programs on racial bias, inclusive hiring policies, transparent pricing models. The store was closed for a week of restructuring. When it reopened, the display windows no longer featured only white mannequins and skeletal poses of wealth. Now there were women of color, of different sizes, one with vitiligo, another with a prosthetic arm, all dressed in the new Eva bridal line, pieces that whispered elegance instead of screaming exclusivity. The boutique's walls, once stark and sterile, had been softened with earthy tones, bookshelves lined with stories of designers from marginalized communities and photos of real brides, submitted from around the world. A sign hung above the reception desk in quiet gold letters, "Every woman is worthy." The city responded with reverence. Brides who had once dreamed of but never dared to enter walked through the doors with trembling fingers and tears in their eyes. They were welcomed with warmth, not judgment. Fittings were no longer performances. They became ceremonies of becoming. And, amidst it all, Celine remained the quiet center. She gave few interviews, released only one statement. "This is not a rebrand. It is a return to purpose." Brands that had once rejected her now scrambled to align themselves with her mission. Magazines that had once ignored Eve now placed it on their covers, but none of it changed her. She continued to ride the subway. She continued to wear linen. She continued to choose silence over spectacle, substance over noise. One afternoon, as she walked along the Brooklyn waterfront with Carter, hand in hand, they passed a mother and daughter standing near an ice cream truck. The girl, maybe 9 or 10, stared at Celine with wide eyes. She was dark-skinned, her hair in braids, wearing a T-shirt with a drawing of a crown and the word "bold" beneath it. She tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, that's the lady from the dress." The woman turned. She looked at Celine, then back at her daughter, smiling gently. "Yes, baby," she said, "that's her." Celine knelt, meeting the girl's gaze. "What's your name?" she asked. "Amaya." "Well, Amaya," she said, "you look like someone who knows her worth." The girl beamed. "I want to make dresses too." Celine nodded. "Then you will." They stood and parted without fanfare, but the moment stayed with her, not because she had been recognized, but because the girl had seen herself in her. That was the mission. That was the revolution. Back at her studio, she met with her team in a circle of chairs by the wide windows. Mariah took notes as Celine outlined the next phase. Scholarships for fashion students from underserved communities, grants for small designers, global collaborations with artisans in villages from Ghana to rural Japan. "We're not just making dresses," she said. "We're making space." The team nodded, some with tears in their eyes. As night fell again over the city, Celine sat on the rooftop garden of their apartment building. Carter brought her tea, and they watched the lights blink to life below. "You're not done, are you?" he asked. She looked at him, then out at the city. "No," she said, "I'm just beginning." And above them, stars blinked into place one by one, like stitches in a fabric too vast to comprehend, sewn silently by the hands of those who dare to change the pattern. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch the next video to discover another powerful journey. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it.